Alright, here's an intro to how this works. One of the things that you're going to need to really get the most out of watercolor painting in Photoshop is a decent blending tool. One of the things that people have begged for in Photoshop for years is something that'll really let you blend color on the canvas. Photoshop CS5 has a color mixer brush that takes up all of your RAM and all of your CPU all at the same time, and even at that doesn't really do any better a job than a really simple tool that you can make using the smudge tool, which is already in Photoshop, earlier versions of Photoshop. And the smudge tool, the way that it comes out of the factory in its default setting, is generally agreed upon to be useless. But I have discovered that it's really not that difficult to turn it into something pretty useful. And I can't really take credit for that. I learned about that through the wonderful natural media plugin that is, I can show you, that's known as NKS3, and I'm going to include a link to that in the annotations because it is a fabulous collection of free tools that you can put into Photoshop that includes a really nice blender. And because this is based on Photoshop actions and really simple tool presets, you can reverse engineer how to make a good blender. So if you want to make a good blender, you use the smudge tool. You use a very, very simple round airbrush, just a soft airbrush. The brush tip shape is round. It's 0% hardness. But here's the key part. You want to turn on scattering, because what that will do is avoid the kind of smearing look that the smudge tool usually brings. If you have scattering on and it looks sort of pebbly like this, then I will show you what this looks like normally so that you'll get a sense of what it's really doing. Because this blender is going to be very important for doing some of the wet in wet looks that we want to see in watercolor. So I'm just going to take a couple of colors and I'm going to put them side by side so that you can see the efficacy of this blender. I'm going to zoom in a little bit more. We have our blender, and you can see it works very quickly. It blends for most purposes very well. It's not ideal, it isn't perfectly smooth, but it works very, very well. Pretty much well enough for anything that we want to do here. And frankly, the roughness that it lends to the blending is going to be an asset when we get into the kind of coarse look of watercolor. So create a blender, create a tool preset. I use the one right out of NKS3 called Blend Fast, and you're going to be in business. Alright, now let's start with the technique proper. You can open up a new Photoshop document, doesn't matter what size, and what you're going to do is make sure that you have a white background, because if the background is transparent then the watercolors won't have anything to be up against. Then create a new group. It'll be called Group 1. Then what you're going to do is create a mask for the entire group. You're going to create a mask, and it's not going to be just for one layer, but it's going to be just for the group. Right now this group doesn't have anything in it. It's an empty group. I've selected the mask itself, and now what I'm going to do is fill the mask with a watercolor paper texture that I really like. This comes right out of the default paper presets. It's just a default Photoshop pattern, and it's called Gouache Light on Watercolor. To me, this is just the best thing, and I'm going to hit OK. Now, Photoshop patterns are grayscale, and in masking, white means that the layer shows through, and black means that the black parts are the parts that are obscured. So if we look at channels, this is just to show you what's going on underneath. When you have a mask on, you can't see what's happening. So if you look, when I turn this on and off, you can see a very subtle kind of pebbly texture coming through. If I were to create a layer and fill it with this texture all by itself, it'll give you a better idea of what it looks like. This is the texture that exists on that mask. You can see it looks a lot like watercolor paper. It has a kind of fiber texture. It isn't too gnarly, but I think that this is almost a little bit too dark, and because dark in masking is going to obscure things, I'd like to use levels to lighten it up. I want to bring the brightness of this mask up, because that will help what is within the contents to show through a little bit better. So I'm going to select the mask. I can get rid of this layer now because it was just to show you what it looks like. Select the layer mask here and open levels. You can hit Control L if you like keyboard shortcuts. Bring the white down so that it doesn't take as much for what's underneath to come through as white. And if you look very, very carefully, you can see that the layer mask is getting brighter than when I started. So if you look at it now, and now when I bring the rightmost white arrow closer to the middle, watch carefully, when I let go, it becomes whiter. It really does not take too much careful futzing. Just bring the white a little bit closer to the middle and you should be fine. Hit OK. And now create a layer that's going to be inside this group. You can call this Watercolor. Call it Watercolor 1. Hit OK. And now you want to set the blending mode for your new layer to multiply, because this is going to be a transparent layer and you don't want anything that is on this layer to be opaque relative to anything underneath it. For example, if I have a line drawing, and in fact I will do a little quick sketch to give me something to color in. I have a layer outside of my watercolor group here. I'm just going to do a quick little pencil drawing to give you an idea of what we're going to be coloring in. I'm just going to draw a box. So if you want to do a pencil drawing, or if you have scanned a pencil drawing and you want to watercolor over it, you don't want your watercolors to be opaque. So when you're inside your watercolor group here, you want to set your layer blending mode to multiply. And anytime you create a new layer here, you're going to want to set your layer mode to